Roadman, welcome back. Today's guest is the amazing Mr. John Wakefield. John is one of the very best cycling coaches in the world. He came to my attention a few years ago for his work with Science to Sport, where he was transforming athletes into some of the very best athletes in the world. I'm talking hitters, the likes of Matt Beers, Ashleigh, Moolman, Pasio. I obviously wasn't the only one who noticed this, because he's since moved on to World Tour team Bora. Over there, he is working with the likes of Roglic, Jay Hindley. He's hands-on with the very best riders in the game. Today, I attempt to focus his considerable knowledge on solving a single question. How do we optimize our training if our goal is to go far? This could be a century ride, this could be just a long training ride, a gravel event, or even an ultra distance race. You're going to absolutely love this conversation with John Wakefield. To support this podcast, please check out the sponsors in the description below. And now, it's John Wakefield. John, welcome to the Roadman podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Still wondering why you've chosen me, but thanks for having me.
Your reputation precedes you. You're one of the most requested guests, I'd have to say.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, well, definitely not from my ex, but I'll take that as a compliment.
She actually sent me in a number of questions for this, but I won't raise it now.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
We're talking a little bit off air, and some of the events like Tracker, Unbound, Badlands, these are the biggest events in the amateur cycling world at the moment. And I'm not entirely sure that athletes that are participating in them, the non-pro athletes, I'm not entirely sure we train correctly for these. Our training hasn't evolved from when road racing was our priority for the season. So that's what I want to figure out today. I want you to sprinkle a little bit of your World Tour magic onto the training plan of someone getting ready for one of these events. I suppose, to start it out, is there, if someone came to you and they're like, I want to do Badlands, so it's 780 kilometers split over 3 days, not even split over 3 days, 780 kilometers go. It's going to take you roughly 3 days to complete it. And they're like, I only have 6 hours a week training because of work, family, and social obligations. Is there a point where you're like, well, that's an undoable feat. That's too many kilojoules you're going to get through over 780 kilometers in gravel, considering you only have 6 hours a week to prep? Like, where do the guardrails kick in on this?
Yeah, it's a good question, because as a coach or someone that's inquiring about that definitely is a variable of what you get. However, it's not always a limiting factor. Training essentially is quality over quantity, but there is that point where you say to the gentleman or the lady, I don't advise this, I don't think we can prep enough, but essentially it's always up to them to go and give it a go. What I try identify, if there is a very limited period of volume that they can do or time, depending on a busy schedule, is understand first off if they're actually going to get to the training that I would prescribe them within those hours that they have available, or whether it's going to be, I can do like Tuesday, but then I'm not really going to do something the next session because I'll miss it because I'm busy, etc. So if you can utilize that full amount of time and you're able to prescribe a stimulus to get what you want out of that athlete, then you essentially go for it. But if you have those limiting factors, then I would say, I would never tell someone don't do it, but I would give them reasoning why it may not be the best idea going forward. But essentially, it's always up to them to decide what they do.
You guys are working with some super young riders. Like I see Joe Pitcock is on your website, Tom Pitcock's younger brother, as one of the athletes you guys are working with. I raced him at Easter weekend in Ireland in Rossmoon. He won the last stage. He's moving super well. When you look at an athlete like that, you're probably looking at a 10, 15, maybe even 20-year time horizon for what his career is going to be. How do you take that long-term planning for an athlete who is, I suppose, age group, to use a triathlon term, who's someone balancing conflicting demands on their time, work, family, etc., and they're coming in to do an event like this, which is a stretch target? Are you looking at them and saying, look, if you do an event like this, it has potential to be one and done. Like, you're going to have to go so deep. The experience is going to be so miserable that it's unlikely we're going to have them the following year as well.
It really depends on how narcissistic they are at the end of the day. So I know it sounds rough, but you do have to have that sort of enjoying the suffering where we've mentioned Badlands, where I've had guys do it, first-time athletes, and they've done it and they've just completed it. Nothing else. There was no goal. Their goal was just to complete it. Took them a significant amount of time, and they went through all levels of hell, but yet they've gone back the following year. So it's where you sometimes get messages during it because you have that availability, and you just like, hey bud, let's keep going. Let's get to that next point. At the end of it, you have your debrief, and then, you keep them on as an athlete because they've enjoyed that journey. And then they tell you the following year, I'm going back, but then the goal is, hypothetically, if it took them 72 hours, now they want to do 68, so that's a goal going forward and a progressional point where if you take someone like Ulrich, if he was second, your next goal is for him to go first. So it's really dependent on the athlete and the goals and what is a realistic goal. A guy that finished a day and a half behind Ulrich is not going to win the following year, no matter what you look at it. So it really comes down to the athlete, the person, what the goal is, what the objective outcome is, and can we make that improvement?
I had Dylan Johnson on the podcast, the American YouTuber, gravel rider, and he had an interesting take on aerodynamics. He thinks slower riders should be more focused on aerodynamics, which does make sense because you're going to be out there for longer, so the potential gains you get are greater.
Yes and no, because when you go aerodynamic, it's typically based on a position. And if we call them an amateur cyclist compared to a pro that's going to win, so if we take that age group amateur cyclist, and anything aerodynamic is based on whether you can hold that position for that period of time. So, if you put them in this aggressive aerodynamic position and they can't hold the position, it's pointless. So to me, I don't disagree with him, but for me, it would be what you can sustain power in a comfort level as long as possible, which will make you go faster. So hypothetically, if they do 220 watts for the full duration in a non-aggressive aero position, that is better than them doing an aero position that they can't hold, and then everything goes kind of to hell because they're now change their position because they don't have that durability to hold that. So for me, yes, it's important, but I would go more on what is sustainable power over a longer period of time and what makes them more durable versus aerodynamics.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about how, tactically, how we go about building out a training plan. Rob Britton was on the podcast, and Rob was talking about his average power is so low. Even winning Badlands, I think his average power was south of 190 watts for the entire event, which
sounds right.
For most trained riders, that's a zone 2 ride.
Yeah.
How do we go about thinking around volume and intensity distribution in a training plan for one of these guys?
So I would still periodize the training plan per normal periodization of what we want as an outcome. In terms of volume
maybe just jump in there, John, even clarify that. What are we talking about normal periodization? Are you an advocate of reverse periodized plan, standards 3 weeks each, build it on the next, and then kind of a decompression week?
Yeah, so I would, depending on the athlete, but it would say be a 3+1, so 3 weeks on, 1 off, or maybe 4-1-1, depending what that athlete can handle from a load perspective, and then build up from, if we go really traditional, from your base period, your pre-preparation, medium intensity, high intensity, taper and go, and, sometimes I do play around where I mix sort of some blocks up and some phases and microcycles up, but essentially I would block periodize it correctly going into the event. And again, whether an athlete can handle 3+1 or 4+1, it's completely based on them. But I wouldn't mainly go reverse periodization. One or two cases I have, but that's, for someone just entering, the answer would be no.
Okay.
Put it that way. A strong focus that I do have for these ultra events is I put a lot of focus on strength, obviously off the bike, and then also your neuromuscular efforts and your metabolic efforts on the bike. For me, that's a really important part, because the minute fatigue kicks in, which it does, and you can't turn a higher cadence or a higher power, you need to then revert, which if you watch cadence of these ultra cyclists, the cadence always goes lower and lower and lower as fatigue sets in and the sessions go harder. There'll be a point where you're not running on watts, you're running on Newton meters of torque. And when that fatigue kicks in, you need to revert to torque to keep going. And obviously with torque, your power is lower, but your torque is higher, and you're still producing power or strength to go forward on the bike. And that's something I'm a strong advocate of.
Do you start building that in immediately with someone as soon as they come in the door with you?
Yeah, 100%, especially for an ultra based or an ultra athlete. And I do revisit that during our whole training phase going in.
And that's off the bike, gym work, and on the bike. All
Yes.
skills, strengthies, as Alan Davis would call them.
Yeah, correct, 100%.
And when we think about a normal Joe Friel style periodization system like this, we're typically cycling from endurance work into adding a bit of tempo work in one phase, coming into the next phase, we're adding a bit of threshold into VO2 and sprint. But do we still is there a role for sprint type training in this? Because we're looking at some of these files I've seen, people aren't really getting north of 800 watts all too often.
Sure. But so the answer is yes, but just because you don't do it during the event, it doesn't mean that you don't do it in training, because essentially that stimulus, you want to increase your VO2. You increase your VO2, your threshold can improve, your metabolic phase improves. So you want to improve as an athlete, essentially going forward from a physiological point, regardless of whether you're going to be doing 40-20 type simulation in that endurance event.
So you're looking at working above that to pull it up, kind of.
Correct. So you still want to improve your peak power, because then everything underneath it improves.
Okay, very interesting. And someone that's coming in, I suppose I'm trying to think as we're chatting about the differences between the clients you're working at in Bora who have all day to ride their bike versus average Joe coming in. And one of the things that we touched on a couple of times is we can't just ride our bike all day. I wake up this morning, I want to go ride my bike, but we do a podcast and I have another couple of emails to get back to. I'll ride my bike, I'll come back, I have more work to do. And that's the reality for most of us. So fatigue is a big issue, because I suppose the outcome of a session we're trying to get is to get faster on the bike, not to tick a box and just say we've done a session. So it's that recovery gives us that space to get the adaptation. How do you think about feedback mechanisms?
So feedback comes in many forms. One being what you see in a data file. Obviously, from an athlete, you can see if their session was done well within the ranges, etc., that you want. For myself personally, I still believe very much in that human communication in terms of feedback, where it's like a simple message is, "Hey, how'd you feel?" And then from an external side, I use the submaximal fatigue test, which is every sort of 7 to 10 days. And that tracks everything. Essentially, it tracks progression, whether you are or aren't progressing with your specific athlete. And that to me is when you correlate kind of all of those together, you get a full picture of where the athlete actually is.
Hey Roadman, excuse the short interruption. I love riding the bike, but on account of being so busy with the podcast at the moment, I'm now what's called a time-crunched rider. I never thought I'd see the day. But I have a tool. I'm using Wattbike to keep myself sharp and on point with specific sessions to maximize that available training time. I have a Wattbike Atom right here in the recording studio beside me, and when I have an hour in between interviews, I jump on. It's removing all the friction points for me. There's no more 10-minute setup, unfolding legs, banging my knees off stuff, getting my hands dirty, the usual connection issues. It just works every single time. The Atom's perfect for virtual racing as well because it has crisp gear changes, it has 1% accuracy, and it has max gradient capability of up to 25%. If you're looking for an indoor trainer, I honestly couldn't recommend this any higher. I've been using a Wattbike since 2013. Honestly, it's the last indoor trainer that you're ever going to need. If you head on over to wattbike.com now and use code ROADMAN10, that's ROADMENTEN, and that's going to get you 10% off your Wattbike. So what's the submaximal fatigue test?
It started off as Lambert's submaximal fatigue test. As a company, we sort of took that data and just sort of fine-tuned it a little bit. So it's a 3-minute test at a specific power range that you would prescribe to that athlete. So hypothetically, it's anything from threshold to 110% of threshold as a power value. And they would perform that 3-minute at that specific power, as I said, every sort of 7 to 10 days, depending where they are maybe in a block of racing, if it allows it or not. Then you would move it up. Once the athlete has completed that, there's a very short questionnaire which involves RPE value for the 3 minutes, your time to exertion, and then other external factors like sleep, mood, wellness, tracks your weight, etc. We get that back as correlated data, and then we track that, and that can track whether an athlete is progressing. So is our stimulus correct between intensity, as an example, and recovery, or are we going in the opposite direction where the athlete is fatigued and we need to change training, or is the stimulus not correct and he's plateaued or stagnated? And that is, when done correctly, reporting from the athlete, it's almost bulletproof. The other benefit is that if they are kind of lying on it, and you can pick up bullshit, to be honest, and make sure that it's, and you say to them, hey, like these factors and metrics aren't kind of correlating. Let's make some changes.
Can this be a field test, or do you need them in the lab doing lactates during it as well? Like, what's the protocol for it?
No, it's outside. So they do it kind of any day. So as an example, if I give it to you and you have a 2-hour recovery ride, or even if you have intervals, you would do that within the first sort of 10 minutes of your ride and then go and do the rest of your training for the day.
Very interesting. I hadn't heard of it before. And Is there enough time? So it's every 7 to 10 days. You prescribe a training block, 10 days. I do a submaximum fatigue test 10 days later. Is there enough time for my body to absorb that training and make an adaptation that's noticeable in the data?
Yes, you typically get really good data straight away from that.
Is this standard in World Tour at the moment, or is this something you guys are kind of pioneering?
It's not standard. We had introduced it. Obviously, myself and my business partner, Jarin Swat, were at UAE together, and we had introduced it there. And we had introduced it as a company with our athletes, with a specific kind of category of athletes. And we had obviously then brought it over for monitoring there, and I've just carried it over to Bora with my specific group of athletes that I use now, that I work with now.
It's a great idea because most of us intuitively know inside, you're starting a 20-minute threshold effort. Inside 2-3 minutes, you have a really good idea how you feel. You have a really good idea how the rest of that session is going to go. Yeah. Like I've started a threshold effort after a long day, and it's like you get on it, and within 2-3 minutes, heart rate's not where it should, RPE is not where it should, and you're like, I'm going to suffer so bad for the next 20 minutes.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And what we ask is, obviously, as they do the 3 minutes, they fill that sort of very short questionnaire out straight away. So as soon as they do it, I get that feedback straight away. And I would look at it, and if things really aren't good, I would make contact with that athlete straight away and say, like, look, abort the session, or like if it's fine, I don't report to them straight away, and they carry on going.
Feedback is an interesting one because feedback is the athlete's ability to communicate feedback too. And some people with different personalities are good and bad at feedback. Have you played around with introducing personality tests?
Yes, not really a test in itself. I try adapt myself to that athlete's personality instead of them kind of always adapting to myself. like you need to find a happy medium. But for me, if you get an athlete that's a little bit on the spectrum side versus an athlete that kind of is normal, I kind of have two very different approaches when I deal with each athlete. So that kind of like, I sometimes feel I have a really good potential to have multiple split personalities. I could be a great serial killer, I think. But yeah, that's, I know some teams and that are doing that and introducing that slowly now. I haven't personally ever done one with an athlete or got one to do it. I just kind of do it on feeling and try adapt accordingly.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I know a lot of companies are starting to, and the links between top performers, it doesn't necessarily have to be sport. I've noticed a lot speaking on the podcast to people who are CEOs of big companies, and the amount of common traits they have with Valtteri Bottas, who drives an F1 car, with Greg LeMond, multiple Tour de France champion. High performance is a thread that links all these people together, and personality tests are definitely creeping into corporate world more and more.
Yeah. Like, someone says to me, oh, why do you, coach this age group athlete? And for me, sometimes an age group athlete is the easiest athlete to coach, especially if he runs a really high-end company. Like if I coach, there's a CFO that I coach, how he approaches work is how he approaches his training, and he's the easiest guy to coach. I ask him to do something, it's done. The feedback is there. It's bulletproof, and you kind of think, I wish that some of the professional athletes at Pro Conti or amateur or, World Tour level are as professional as what this guy does. So that when you speak to him is like, well, that's what my life is like. That's what I just transfer straight over to my training. So what you say is 100% correct.
And is that, let's maybe unpack that idea of professionalism. Like what makes him so professional? And is that a trait that you can see repeated among top performers? Is it the same reason Roglic is successful? Is it the same reason Vlasov is successful? What is that trait that we call professionalism?
I would say how I like to look at it, and it's also quite a wide road, but it is the attention to detail. It's a very structured attention to detail. Someone has asked me, oh, who's the most professional person you've ever worked with as an athlete? And I didn't personally coach him, but I worked with him closely. I landed up doing a lot of races with him and stuff when I was at UAE, and that was Alexander Kristoff. He was probably the most professional athlete I've ever seen. And yes, don't get me wrong, Tadej winning the Tour is super professional. Roglic has been incredible since he's come to Bora. But they all carry that same trait where, yes, they're fun and they laugh and they make good jokes and stuff like that. But when it comes to their trade, it is just super focused, super professional. Their attention to detail is incredible. And I just feel that is what makes them. Like you walk in their room and their bag is packed, it's clean, where you walk in some athletes' riders' rooms and it's like, mate, you've got to flush a toilet. It's like, so when you look at it that side, I do feel that then follows over into the actual racing on the bike.
I remember having a football manager back when I was a kid. I played football, tried to make it as a pro. I got to kind of pro in Ireland, which is not really pro, about the level I got in cycling. Sure. And I had a football manager who fined me for having dirty boots one day. And I remember going home, 100%. I must have been 14 years old, and going home and just baffled at this, talking to my dad. I'm like the boots are going to get dirty. I'm going onto a dirty pitch. Why does he care if my boots are dirty starting the session? And my dad said to me, because how you do anything is how you do everything. I was like, that's correct. Such a beautiful turn of phrase, because it's so true.
Yeah, correct. Like even, with our lab here in Girona, you get people that come in with a good clean bike that we work on. And then you get guys that, it's like going to the dentist with peanut brittle in your mouth. You just don't do that. And I just feel that, if that's how you do this, it flows over into every other part of your life or what you do. Like going back to the ultra stuff, there was the one rider I work with, super professional, super successful, really wins races, podiums, like fantastic. And then he's like, at the end of the year, where I'm like, man, this was unbelievable. He says, like, what can we do to be like 2-3% better? And you sit there going like, I thought we could maybe let go of 2 or 3% and just have it a bit easier. But yet you see how that is, and it's everything from tire pressure to, do I need to eat this at that time? And it's just those small things that have a really big impact at the end. And how modern cycling is, especially at World Tour level now, it's changed so much over the last 4 years. And even now coming into the ultra side, and as you said, the gravel, which has also become a lot more professional, you need to apply your trade 100% so you can get a 90% reward almost nowadays. Like nowadays that, I've got the talent, I can get by, doesn't really cut it anymore.
The line is difficult, isn't it, for amateurs? And I struggle with this myself as well, because the nature of cycling, it sucks you in. And it's why every time I go out to Girona for 2 weeks, I'm like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a bit of balance of work and training. And then I'm like 200K deep into a ride out near France or something with a load of full-timers. I'm like, what am I doing? How have I got sucked back in this deep?
Yeah.
That's hard, because it's a sport that you can always give more to. I have a friend who's training for the moment for a Tracker for the 500 one or the 520 or whatever it is, and he's trying to win that at the moment. And I was chatting to him and he's like, I think I've done everything I can. I was like, you can always do more in cycling. Like, you're not in an altitude tent, you haven't done camps. It's like, at what point is that healthy balance for amateur athletes to say, I'm being professional and I've done enough, but I'm not running a, train without a driver through my whole personal life and my professional life?
It's actually a very good topic, because I have found lately that line is so thin and linear, where what I say to people is, what are you being paid to do? And they'll say, I'm being paid to be an accountant. And you're like, okay, but that's where your focus is. You're not paid to be a professional, So yes, they are 100% into it, and they, dot the I's and cross the T's, but there's some of them that are doing more than what a full-time professional that's actually landing on the podium at Tracker is doing.
Yeah.
And that is where it's like too much has a negative effect. With those people, I sometimes say, do less. Like you are more intense than my most intense World Tour athlete. And that to me, I think, just becomes like it works negatively. That line between, in performance now, that line between success and failure is so thin, where before it wasn't. And I just feel that the more that athlete does, that serious amateur athlete, and goes deeper into it because they possibly have the finances, the resources, they fully invested, they are clever and they have a brain, so they invested into it, has a negative effect. It's like, maybe do less, bring the fun back into it, and you'll actually have a better reward.
There's a strange counterintuitive phenomenon I've observed at the moment in friends. And this is non-cycling friends, but you could equally apply it to some of the World Tour guys. Their life is really good. They're making a good income. They have a great social family set up, sport balance, everything. And then they make a financial decision to make more cash, which actually makes their life worse. So they're already making enough cash to cover everything they want to do, but they take that promotion and it actively makes their life worse. They spend less time with their family, less time on their hobbies, less time on everything. And I've been trying to figure out, what is that? Like, what motivates people to make this decision time and time again? And the best I can unpack it is they're viewing the world purely through a financial lens. That's the only that's their only metric for success, is the number in my bank account going up. And I think the same could be extended into riders who just get a little bit too obsessive. They start to view the world just through performance, to the detriment of everything else. And if you unpack this long tail, you look at somebody like, who I'm a huge fan of, Bradley Wiggins. I followed him all my career.
Fantastic.
Coming out the far end of that and observing it 15 years later, was it 2013 he won the Tour, 10 years later?
Yeah.
Can we call that success if he's wrestling with potentially some addictive properties or personalities, if he's divorced, if he's, a little bit antisocial? that system that made him the great champion, that he wins the Tour de France and then the Olympics 6 days later, is also a system that's left him in a less than optimum place post-career. Is that success? Roadman, I know how serious you take your goal setting, whether they're fitness or life-related goals. If you're looking for a powerful ally to support you on this journey, look no further than HUEL. HUEL has become my secret weapon for when I don't have time to prepare a balanced meal. It ensures I get the nutrition I need without sacrificing time or taste. Plus, it stops me from reaching for that takeaway menu. I always throw a bottle into my backpack when I'm heading into the city to work, and it stops me eating junk convenience foods, snacking on croissants and bars of chocolate, because I know they don't support my training goals. It's a handy, nutritious meal on the go, and it's got over 22 grams of protein. HUEL is perfect for athletes that don't have time to cook or prepare food before a training session. It's convenient, nutritious fuel at your fingertips, ensuring you hit your daily fueling needs for that session. HUEL Ready to Drink has 26 essential vitamins and minerals in every single bottle. You're getting a whopping 175 health benefits. Plus, it's made from natural ingredients like tapioca, sunflower seed, coconut, and more. The best part? It's the flavours. There's 8 crazy, beautiful flavours. Iced coffee is what's in my backpack right at the moment. You can get HUEL directly to your home. All you got to do is head on over to the HUEL website, huel.com/Roadman.
Yeah, to me personally, if I look at it, I would say no. Like that. And I will always say, to me, Bradley Wiggins was essentially the ultimate cycling chameleon. He had success on the road, incredible success on the track, multiple Olympic champion, success as just a one-day road racer, small tours, and then he went and won the Grand Tour. So anything you gave him to do on a bike, he would morph into it and do it. I can't really tell you any other riders, current, previous, that have done something like that. So he's definitely one in a million. And he had success if you look at it from a Paul Mars. But where he is today, is that a success of that success? To me, no. But look, I have no context. But if I just look at it from what you see on the outside, to me, no. To me, like a success would be, it doesn't matter whether he got divorced or not. That's a series of life. But it's like, is he happy? Is he living well, if you want to call it? Is he healthy? Mentally, physically, etc. And when you look at it from the outside, to me, it doesn't look like it. But I have no actual inside proof of it, So to me, it was like all that success didn't work, in the grand picture.
So is there a coaching job there for Wiggins? If you could, we had a time machine and we go back and we're working coaching Wiggins, is there a pull on the reins here, and maybe you don't need to devote 100% of your focus to high performance, that it's better to maintain some friendships? Another one that springs up, there's a brilliant documentary narrated by, I think it's called The Weight of Gold by Michael Phelps. If you haven't watched it, it's brilliant. And he talks about how he was seriously depressed and suicidal after winning the record number of Olympic gold medals. And it's like, how can these two things be true in the same sentence? It's such a paradox.
Sure. But there with Olympic athletes, it is common for all athletes. I am in the belief of this, is that, the highs are so high and the lows are so low that you do go from, like a dog not seeing you for 2 weeks and running around like a lunatic to, sitting there completely and utter clinically depressed. And with the Olympics, there is a long history of, you've worked so hard for, say, 4 years, go to the Olympics, you do your event, whether it's 100 meters, it's over in 10 seconds. And if you get the results you wanted, that's great. If you didn't, also not great. But both effects after that is, what are you doing? There is nothing else if that's your last Olympics.
Yeah.
So they never thought of anything on the Monday after the Olympics. They only thought of everything until the Sunday, until the event. And in fairness, often, this is maybe a bit of an aggressive thing to say, is that once you're done with the Olympics, your federation doesn't care. They just use you for the Olympics. Like, let's be completely honest, So there is no forward planning from that. Yes, unless you're back in the system and you go to the next Olympics or whatever the case may be, or you have 2 Olympics in you and you're in the program. But as soon as you're done, like, unfortunately, you're done. It's like it's any job. If I'm programming computers and the company finds somebody better and there's nothing for me, I'm out.
Yeah, it's ruthless. And to pivot
it
into
ruthless.
Our conversation on ultra endurance, there's a phenomenon I've definitely experienced. I'm sure you've seen it with athletes. I call it the post-stage race blues. You're with the guys for 8 days. You're living, having the laugh. There's motorbikes, there's time checks, there's crowds, and then you go home and it's like there's none of that, and it's hard to cope with that. That's the same. I think that's similar for ultra endurance guys, though. How do you deal with that?
Like the ultra endurance guys that I've dealt with and I do deal with, they are, how do you say, like they are special. To go that deep and that long, you need to have a bit of a dark side inside yourself, to be honest, that you have to tap into. Otherwise, I really don't believe you can complete them, never mind complete them well and finish them. But there, I try, so say someone has come off Badlands, my communication with them is in the first few days, it's like they're still on the high because they've completed it and they're good to go. If there's nothing planned, an event, so hypothetically, say they go, I know the dates don't work, but say they go from Badlands to Tracker, it's easier to keep them in track because you're going, hey, we're going from here, 2 weeks recovery, what have you, and then we're going to build to Tracker. But if there's nothing, that's when you need to start getting on the phone with them, what is happening, where we at, and kind of identify where they are from a mood perspective, and then give them, what I try to do is give them smaller goals. So even if it's like, we're going to try to do a new 5-minute power, they have a goal to achieve, and it keeps them there. It's almost like boredom creates depression.
The job of a coach in whether it's World Tour or whether it's getting ready for these ultras, it's morphing from purely physiological into physiological and psychological. There's no doubt that in any of these events, whether it's Rob Britton winning Badlands or whether it's your age group are going to complete it over 5 days, you're going to experience a period of profound darkness, of a moment where you're like, why the hell did I sign up for this? Like, what was I thinking? I have a good life back home. This is stupidity. What systems can we put in place to almost preemptive systems, knowing that that's going to happen? Is there a mental framework? Struck by some of the Team Sky lads and talked to one of them, and he had this idea of pressing his thumb and his forefinger together. His job was to bring Wiggins into position for the base of some of these alpine climbs, and he'd press his thumb and his forefinger together. And for him, that was the moment where he's like, okay, I've been away from my loved ones at altitude camps and training camps for the better part of the year. I've missed so much, kids' first steps, communions, friends' birthdays, weddings. There's been so much sacrifice, and the sacrifice is for this moment right here. Wiggins needs to be in position at the bottom of Vaughan 2. It's go time, or all that was impossible. Is there anything like that we can tap into for when that inevitable darkness hits?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, there is. What is right now? I really don't have an answer exactly, but yes and no. I as I said, I don't have an exact answer what that specific point / go-to is, but I do believe that is something that has to be in effect going forward. And that's in a wide thing, whether it is that super domestic, making sure that 1 kilometer is the most important kilometer of the whole of July for him, or whether it's someone, as you said, coming off Badlands and they've got to introduce themselves back into sort of society by going back to work, is super important.
Do you think you should replicate the darkness? Like, should someone who's thinking we're stuck with Badlands as a common example, so we'll stick with it, but someone that's going to do Badlands, should they do a full-length race recce that puts them into that dark place, both physiologically and psychologically?
No, because I don't think you can replicate something like that, to be honest. I really don't. That, I believe, you either have it in you or you don't. Yes, you can improve it and learn to use that darkness, if we use that as our term, but I don't think you can replicate that in training. I
love that term, darkness. It sounds like we're talking about Star Wars or something.
Yeah, exactly. But it is like the last year, but it's funny now, but I laugh about it now, and we both laugh about it. But the one athlete that had done a race last year, it was like something like a 4,000 kilometer nonstop. I mean, it was stupid, and really, it was stupid. And towards probably halfway in, towards the end, I was getting voice notes at 3 a.m. from him that he was literally saying to me, like, it amazed me. He knew he was messaging, because he was like, "Hey, John, just want to let you know this is an update. Book iPad orange elephant, and we're going to go swimming in the morning." And that was his voice note. And I'd be like, "Mate, like this is," and then I'd voice him back and I'd be like, "Hey, like, thanks for the voice note, like really good, like keep going," because I could track him, obviously. So I'd be tracking and he'd be going good. And then like, whatever, 2 hours later, "Hey, just to let you know, I'm at kilometer 2,800 and I'm going to be, seeing my wife at 5, and then we're going to go do this on like Sunday night." And I'm like, "Mate, it's Wednesday and you're in the middle of nowhere." But he was completely gone. But yet he had enough sense to know he had to message me. I suppose maybe that was a connection of his thing. But I can tell you now, he was in an unbelievably dark place. Like, there was no question about it. But yet he was still fully functional. So there he had embraced that, learned to use it. And as I said, I'm sure I wasn't the only one getting voice notes about elephants and stuff like that. But, there, it was a positive embrace. And I believe that ultra endurance takes a special mindset to do that. Like, I've done a 24-hour mountain bike and it was enough for me. I mean, like, that
one of
was
the funniest
it.
WhatsApp groups I've ever been in was at Badlands. They set up a WhatsApp group for all the participants. So you're watching it like after you've finished and you're just seeing the messages coming in. So you see this, they use like CAP to identify you, so your number. So someone puts in a message and it's like, there's not a lot of traffic going into this. It's really only for emergency updates. So it's like, "Hey guys,
Sure.
CAP 75 here. I've run out of water and I'm in a pretty bad way." It's like you're just sitting there. You go for a bit of lunch or you walk down the town or whatever. And you're like, "Let's have a look how this drama unfolds." And then it's like, "Hey guys, CAP 75 again here. I'm starting to get really concerned." Like,
and you're sitting with a chocolate milkshake.
But eventually it pans out. It's like, "Guys, CAP 75, send help." That was it.
It's like I've rinsed fluid out of my sock. I can get to like kilometer 90,
But it's like, why do we do it to ourselves?
Yeah, but like I do think that sense of accomplishment when it's over is that ultimate high. And I've never done that. Like, as I said, the most endurance thing I've done in one go is like a 24-hour mountain bike race.
That's pretty hardcore though.
Yeah, it was. But even there, at 3 a.m., I was seeing stuff that I should never have seen, visually. But, that's minimal compared to what is in today's times. It's, even when you speak to the guys that are doing the long gravel races of like 320 and 270 and just the nature of a gravel race, like they go through some pretty rough places mentally in that.
Yeah, I seen Lachlan on one of his, I can't remember which one it was, one of his YouTube videos, or maybe it was he telling about a roller or something, but he was going up a climb. I think it was Badlands on the last day. And he said he was looking up at the corner and he'd see the corner and then he'd ride for like 20 minutes and he wouldn't get any closer to the corner. And he'd be like, "Oh, well, that's weird. I'm not going anywhere." And then he's like, I looked at the sky and he's like, "Whoa, there's a lot of stars." And he looked at it again. He's like, "Whoa, there's an impossible amount of stars." And he's like, "Oh no, I'm in a really bad place here. This is not good."
But like, as I said, I think the outcome of that is like the ultimate high. That's what brings them back to doing it again. And it's almost like, it's a bad example, but it's like, it's like a drug addict that needs a fix. He gets the fix and they're on the ultimate high. And then that's like finishing the race. And then they come down and they need that high again. And that's when that specific personality athlete goes, "I'm going from Badlands to 560 tracker, because they keep on hunting that. And as I said, it takes a special person to do those stuff, whether it's they winning or even just finishing it. To me, it takes a special person.
We get this drip down with everything from the World Tour, and everyone's been pushing fuel and carbohydrates carbohydrates seem like the new aero and the new doping mixed in together. Everyone's gone high octane on this 120,
Yes.
130, 140. What happens if I take 180? Do I explode? And as a proxy, that started to happen in ultra endurance, where people are really prioritizing this high carb intake.
Yes.
Do you think it's necessary in ultra endurance to take that many carbs? I would have thought a higher percentage of our workload has been fat fueled than straight out road racing.
Yes and no. So if we just go to the road cycling side of it, is especially over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, the nature of cycling has changed. So I find it's a lot more aggressive from the gun to what it was before. You can see it. Races are faster now. That's it's as clear as day. Like Roubaix now was faster than the previous years. Yes, there's a lot that comes into play, weather, wind, etc. But in general, racing is a lot more intense. You need to fuel that intensity. The only way you're going to do that is by fueling yourself. The only thing comes in is that as an athlete, yes, you can train your gut for better absorption, but there is a point where you can absorb it, or intake, but is your body absorbing it? So there will be a time where you as an athlete can only do 120. You can do it, you can maybe take in 160, but you're not really absorbing it.
Yeah.
So there is that element that needs to come into effect. From the ultra endurance side, again, it's very personal on athletes. Yes, when you look at it from a data side, you are using predominantly fats. That's where you are. So you want to be, your fat oxidation level needs to be good. But again, you still need to fuel, and with an athlete, we had put a really big focus on that last year, and he did increase his carbohydrate intake. We had gone from sort of like, okay, he was low. He was on like 90 to begin with, and we're now on 130, and there was a huge improvement in performance.
Really?
I don't believe he can go more than that for many reasons, because when you are totally smashed 3 days in and you've had 3 hours sleep in 3 days, it is hard to eat. So we had also changed what he ate at the same time. And we are looking at also just introducing, which I'm not a fan of, in World Tour level. I personally believe there's not enough data, but I also don't believe it's of any use, a glucose monitor. I'm not anti it, but I just think it's pointless at World Tour level. But at the ultra endurance, this is coming from one of my business partners who is a nutritionist. He had given me this information, which made sense, especially on the ultra endurance stuff. Maybe a glucose monitor is good to just understand what he or she as the athlete is doing over that long period of time, because you can stabilize over that period. So, but going back to the athlete was, we introduced a higher carbohydrate intake. He definitely felt an improvement, but then it was how we getting that in, especially after 3 days. It's hard to eat solids after 3 days. You also can't pack correct food for 3 days, especially you pull up to a petrol station and they only have X, Y, and Z, available to you. If it's really a raw endurance event where they just say, well, here's a start, here's a finish, we'll hopefully see you in 5 days. So there we kind of tailored it to, okay, what response do you get out of certain stuff at a petrol station, so to speak, and what can you carry that's easy? So if you can't take fuel, like big solid stuff, we're now taking sort of like baby formula, high in nutrition, but easy to carry, and just add water or just like baby slush. So from the endurance side, we've kind of started trying to specialize a little bit that way for him to improve. But, I can't see him doing, if he does 180 grams, he'd need to ride with a string around his ears and a packet between his legs, he'll just be going to the toilet all day.
It's crazy.
It
very
does
interesting,
become specialized.
It's very, very interesting that the trickle down it's real from so much of this stuff from World Tour, that there is performance gains. Just to finish up and circle back to one of the initial premises of the conversation, that our listener to this, they're balancing these conflicting demands and they're trying to get the best return on investment, to use a financial analogy. They're putting in 6 hours a week, 8 hours a week, 10 hours a week. They want to maximize the adaptations they can get from that. Is there anything recovery wise that you're doing at Bora that you think amateur athletes should be implementing? I'm thinking, ketones post training, space boots, massage, foam rolling, ice baths, like the whole plethora of stuff. What should we be doing?
I would say rest is genuinely, if we take one word, I would take rest as your key kind of take home from it. A lot of the time they're doing more than what they meant to, and they're scared of taking rest because I think, if I don't rest, I don't train, I don't get better. But often if you rest, you get the adaptation and you do get better. How you do that recovery or that rest, whether it's, as you said, massage, boots, ice baths, those three things, if we take it as a reference, there is no scientific evidence that shows that they work. It's more a placebo. But yet, for myself, if I have a massage, I feel like a whole new human, like that's what it is. So whichever your go-to is for that, keep doing it. And get that effect back from it. So it's not like there's anything special that you do at World Tour. It's just that when you do recover, you do it 100% correct. Make sure your nutrition is correct. So you're eating correctly, you're resting correctly. And whether, as you said, it's, ketones, whether it's, yes, there is evidence on that post-training, but I really wouldn't kind of try to tell everyday people to go that route. But just make sure you recover properly and don't be scared to rest, to be honest. Like often that is where your problem comes in, is that they're too scared to rest. And when they go worse on the bike or they see a negative training or negative feelings, they think, I'm not fit enough, I must train harder. We do the absolute opposite. Take rest, and when you get back on the bike, you'll typically feel stronger.
I had Matej Mohoric on the podcast, and he had one really simple insight. He said it took him almost a decade to figure out that the purpose of training was to get faster, not just to train. Yeah. And it sounds 100%. So simple, but to think of someone at his level that's won classics already is just having that revelation. Yeah,
correct. And look at Mohoric, like a legend, let's be honest. So, and I've heard how, he's not scared to train and stuff. And, as you said, for him to have that revelation now is, if he does that, he'll be even more dangerous, So my thing is always that people are scared to rest. And when they go worse on the bike, they train harder, which is literally the worst thing you could do, in my personal opinion. Take one step back and go two forward.
And, that's even worse for amateur athletes, because if you think about, we typically have frequency, how many days a week we can train, duration, how long we can train, and intensity, how hard we can train. For amateur athletes, we typically can't up our frequency, we can't up our duration. So when we're going bad, it's normally we need more recovery. But what do? We yank at that frequency lever, or we yank at the intensity lever, and now 4x4 VO2 max becomes 6x4 VO2 max, and we just go harder and harder and dig further and further into that hole. And I think the best way to get out of a hole is to stop digging the hole.
Yeah. And also what that amateur cyclist doesn't understand often is that they train, they often have a wife and kid, they may have a mistress, they have a job, they have
complicated.
They've got all these other external factors that take a lot of energy to manage and do. And if they train from 6 to 8 in the morning, they then go to a full 9 to 5 office job. It's a lot of stress. You're not really recovering. You then got to go home, see your wife, see your kids. As I said, maybe your mistress is somewhere else. There's a lot of stuff going on where, that takes away from recovery time that they don't take into effect. So it's not just they get to go home, and not every pro cyclist goes home and puts his feet up, but their availability to have more recovery at the end of a week in terms of hours is more than me and you going to work.
100%. John, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much for being so generous with your time, and best of luck at the Giro.
Pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to it.
If you enjoyed this video and you want to keep binge watching the content, check this video. It's a cracker. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way I can catch you in the next one. See you then.